1991年呢係以戰爭開始，亦都以戰爭結束。91年年初呢有波斯灣嘅戰爭，91年年尾呢有克羅地亞嘅戰爭。而對主張寬容、諒解、自由同埋和平嘅天主教徒嚟講呢，戰爭自然唔係一件好事。所以91年呢係戰爭年，不斷呢係令到教宗若望保禄二世呢感到呢灰心如焚。睇返1991年年初嘅戰爭呢，係喺短短嘅幾日裏邊呢就解決，但係成件事情呢係延續咗超過半年嘅時間。早喺90年嘅8月，伊拉克呢就侵佔咗科威特。經過幾個月嘅拉鋸，伊拉克呢都唔願意撤出科威特。卒之呢就係話喺美國領導底下，率領咗英國、法國以及其他中東國家嘅部隊呢進入伊拉克，然後呢全面解放咗科威特。科威特人呢恢復咗自由，但係畢竟呢就喺嗰個地區裏邊呢係種下一個不穩嘅種子。到咗91年，南斯拉夫呢一個國家分崩離析，好多加盟共和國呢都要求獨立，其中亦都包括克羅地亞。所以到咗年尾呢，亦都煽起呢一個克羅地亞嘅戰爭。所以由年頭到年尾呢，教宗都感到非常之沮喪，因為年頭有波斯灣戰爭，年尾有南斯拉夫嘅戰爭。咁當然天主教會係希望做一啲嘢嘅，譬如話喺戲裏邊曾經提到，佢係邀請西方各國主要大國嘅主教呢，係開咗一次中東問題嘅會議。一方面呢，希望呢就係就住波斯灣戰爭呢，各個國家嘅主教呢喺本國範圍裏邊做一啲事情。另一方面呢，亦都希望呢就係話承認巴勒斯坦人同埋黎巴嫩人佢哋獨立自主嘅訴求。喺1991年，教宗關心嘅另外一個重要嘅問題呢，就係資本主義社會存在住嘅種種弊端。佢喺呢一年裏邊呢，係非常之側重提及到資本主義社會存在住嘅問題。我哋知道呢，教宗呢係非常之關心民間疾苦嘅。佢希望見到一個社會係冇剝削、冇歧視，亦都希望呢一個社會呢係能夠促進人類嘅創造性。但係資本主義社會存在住嘅問題呢，係令佢非常之警惕同埋非常之關心嘅。佢喺呢一年裏邊呢，曾經訪問過波蘭，亦都訪問過巴西。波蘭嗰陣時呢，已經係擺脫咗共產黨嘅統治，就由以前嘅團結工會領袖華里沙執政。可以講話波蘭已經係恢復自由。但喺呢一個自由嘅波蘭裏邊呢，教宗呢馬上提醒波蘭人民，叫佢哋唔好陷於消費主義同埋享樂主義，唔好呢淨係斤斤計較於呢個急功近利或者係窮奢極侈。喺巴西訪問嘅時候呢，佢更加批判資本主義社會存在住嘅黑暗同埋違反人性嘅行為。佢對於經濟壟斷啊，對於貧富懸殊啊，對於富有國同埋貧窮國家之間嘅嗰種咁嘅剝削嘅關係啊，係感到非常之不滿。佢喺巴西呢特別批判2個問題。第一個問題呢，就涉及到巴西嘅熱帶雨林呢係大量被破壞，佢係非常之反感嘅。另一個問題呢，就係對青少年嘅忽視，因為巴西呢有好多無家可歸嘅青少年，佢哋係自生自滅。嗱，呢一樣嘢呢，就令到教宗對於資本主義社會嘅黑暗呢，係尤其係關注。咁所以喺1991年提出嘅百年通諭裏邊呢，佢除咗強調指出社會主義崩潰嘅原因之外呢，佢更加警惕世界各國嘅人民一定要留意住資本主義社會存在住嘅種種弊端。
On the morning of the 1st of January, as all humanity held its breath waiting for the possible outbreak of a war with unforeseeable consequences, the Pope made an address to the world.
Che il 1991 sia per tutti un anno di pace e non di guerra.
As if anxious to give the year a positive augury from the outset, he hastened to proclaim it the year of the Church's social doctrine, announcing the publication of a commemorative encyclical. His intention was to take the existing doctrine and update it in the light of the new issues of our times. The hopes of John Paul II ended, however, in utter disappointment. The prophet, armed only with the word of God and with his own awareness of being the spokesman of the hopes of humanity as a whole, gradually saw all his efforts fail. 12 months later, he was bitterly obliged to describe 1991 in the worst possible terms, as a year of wars. The following January, presenting his summary to the accredited ambassadors, he pointed out that 1991 had begun and ended to the roar of guns, from the Gulf War with its aftermath of death, destruction and unresolved problems, to the struggles in Yugoslavia and especially in Croatia. Throughout the month of January, the Pope struggled to halt the war machine, using appeals and gestures, reflecting his fruitless efforts on behalf of the Lebanon in previous years. The same approach was soon to be tried again on behalf of Croatia. Up to the 15th of January, the Pope worked to prevent the outbreak of the Gulf War, and after that date to bring it to an end as quickly as possible. In a message to European Community foreign ministers meeting in Luxembourg on the 4th of January, the Pope reminded them of their paramount duty to uphold international law. An ability to suffer with peoples, to participate personally in their tragedies, is characteristic of Pope Wojtyla. In the Angelus of the 24th of February, after more than a month of war, he proved bitter and disappointed, with a tone of voice that revealed the frustration of an unheeded, impotent prophet.
Come in queste ore, la guerra appare come germe di morte. Mai come in questi giorni l'uomo è stato chiamato a far prevalere la ragione sulle passioni. Mai come oggi i responsabili delle nazioni, servitori del bene comune, sono interpellati dalla propria coscienza. Da parte sua, questa sede apostolica ha fatto quanto era nelle sue possibilità per evitare questa terribile guerra.
On the 4th of March, a few days after the cessation of hostilities, the Pope, in an exceptional initiative, called a meeting in Rome of the 7 Western Patriarchs and the representatives of the episcopacies of countries that had directly participated in the Gulf War. They included bishops from the United States, Britain, France, Italy, Belgium and the Council of European Episcopacies. Some described this as the first international conference on the Middle East. It concluded with a request to leaders of the international community to make an immediate start on a solution to all the problems of the Middle East. This should begin with the problem of the Palestinians, whose dignity should finally be recognized, and with the issue of Lebanon, a sovereign country shorn of its full independence in defiance of international order. The request did not overlook those peoples who live in tension because of situations that are unresolved or perhaps forgotten, such as the Cypriots and the Kurds. The echo of the deadly bombing of Baghdad had barely stopped, and only a few months had passed since the United States and its allies had with a heavy hand forced Saddam to retreat from Kuwait. But they had not forced him to step down from power as they had hoped, and now a further tragedy was keeping the Vatican lights burning late into the night, prompting the Pope to repeat his marathon of pleas, appeals, warnings and condemnations. This was the crisis in former Yugoslavia, with the invasion of Croatia, which like Slovenia had declared itself independent from the Federation. A day of prayer for peace in former Yugoslavia was celebrated on the 8th of September, and was an opportunity to remind Belgrade of the solemn undertakings made in Helsinki and in Paris, accompanied by the sad refrain that war does not resolve problems. On the contrary, it leads to new and worse ones. The first Special Synod for Europe was undoubtedly the most important ecclesiastical event of 1991, producing a pastoral summary of events taking place in the centre-east of the continent. To mark the centenary of the Rerum Novarum, John Paul II held that the best way to commemorate the occasion was to demonstrate its effectiveness. On the 1st of May, 2 weeks before the anniversary on the 15th, he promulgated the Centesimus Annus, which was put forward as a development and implementation of Pope Leo's encyclical, providing an interpretation of new matters of our times in the light of the great principles set by Pope Leo XIII and developed by his successors. After highlighting the significance of the crisis of Marxism, the Pope went on to point out that capitalism too had its limits as a model for economic organization.
Capitalism is victorious and may be advocated if one recognizes the fundamental positive role of free enterprise, of the market, of private property, and of the resulting responsibility for the means of production as regards free human creativity in the economic sector.
If indeed the modern enterprise economy has positive aspects, one cannot but condemn the risks of people being exploited and excluded. The Church has no economic models to offer, but gives a reminder that the economy must serve the overall development of the individual. 3 of the 4 papal journeys outside Italy during that year were linked to the European events that had begun in 1989. The Polish Pope's new pilgrimage to the shrine of Fatima, preceded by stops in the Atlantic islands of Madeira and the Azores, was undertaken to give thanks to the Virgin for answering his prayers for reinstatement of the freedom of the peoples of Eastern Europe, as well as renewed thanks on the 10th anniversary of his survival of the assassination attempt. His 4th visit to Poland in June was the first that Wojtyła had made in the liberated country, but was burdened by old and new problems. His World Youth Meeting in Częstochowa was the first of its kind, attended by tens of thousands of Soviet bloc youngsters who were now free to travel and to meet people of their own age from the West. The Black Madonna of Jasna Góra produced the great miracle of liberation from communist rule before the Pope visited post-communist Hungary. As well as these events, the Pope carried out his 2nd journey to Brazil in October. Arriving in Lisbon on the 10th of May, John Paul II gave a hopeful interpretation of the tormented history of these months, using the same words that St. Augustine had spoken when faced with the upheavals of his own time caused by the barbaric invasions and by the collapse of the Roman Empire.
This is not an old world that is coming to an end, it is a new world that is beginning. A new dawn seems to be appearing in the skies of history, calling upon Christians to be the light and the salt of a world that has great need of Christ, the salvation of man. I have come to Portugal to visit Fatima for the 2nd time, to thank the Madonna for the protection she has given the Church during these years that have marked a rapid and deep social transformation, offering new hope for the many peoples oppressed by atheist ideologies that hinder the practice of faith.
By the time the Pope made his 4th visit to Poland, the country was at last free and sovereign, and its symbol was appropriately Lech Wałęsa, the new president of the Republic. In the space of 9 days, the Pope visited 12 places and did not hide his concern that many of his countrymen were pursuing wealth too relentlessly. Like a new Moses, he explained the 10 Commandments to his people at the various stops, warning them against the idols of consumerism and of false freedom, and especially against violating the sacredness of human life through abortion. For the 2nd time, the Pope of the Centesimus Annus occupied himself with the ailments of the vast patient that is Brazil, visiting the destitute areas of the northeast and of Mato Grosso for 9 days. He denounced capitalism's perverse mechanisms, which through the selfishness and economic domination of the rich widened the poverty gap in developing countries. Using strong words so that his energetic attack would be heard throughout the world, John Paul II hit out at the foreign debt that could never be repaid, except at the price of hunger and destitution among the people. He made this attack immediately during the first stage in Natal in the northeast, repeating it everywhere he went, from Cuiabá to the edge of Amazonia, emphasizing the tragedy of the genocide of the Indians and the ecological disaster of the rainforest, even denouncing the Brazilian government, which did not defend the forest against indiscriminate exploitation by the big companies. Here the Pope brought up a sad litany of problems, highlighting all the afflictions of Brazilian children, including the most tragic of these, their extermination.
There cannot and must not be abandoned children or children without families, nor young boys or girls living in the streets. This cannot and must not happen, and the Pope asks and demands this in the name of God and of his Son, who was once a child.
In April, John Paul II consulted all the cardinals, including those over 80 who no longer had a vote, to discuss problems of great importance to the mission of the Church and for the dignity of mankind. These included the defense of human life against abortion, euthanasia, artificial insemination and contraception, and defense against the aggressiveness of the sects, which had taken between 25 and 40 million of the faithful from the Church. The convocation of the Church Senate has been one of the most original and successful initiatives of his period in office. This fourth extraordinary consistory, following those of 1979, 1982 and 1985, began with a ringing denunciation issued by the first speaker, Cardinal Ratzinger. Every year, between 40 and 50 million human lives in the world were snuffed out by abortion, without taking account of the hidden victims of the birth pill and other contraceptives. Faced with this mass slaughter, this real war against human life, the cardinals asked the Pope for a document on the inalienable sacredness of human life and on the abuses and attacks that threaten it. Following Ratzinger's suggestions, they denounced the worrying regression and reversal of moral sensitivity, as a result of which an unconscious passage has been made from silence in the face of evil that is legally permitted to approval of it. The Pope's ministry in Italy was completed for the year with numerous pastoral visits to our regions. Even his brief stay in Val d'Aosta was an opportunity for pastoral visits to Susa and for a Mass at the foot of the Matterhorn. The visit to Camerino, Fabriano and Matelica in the Marche region on the occasion of the Feast of St. Joseph was used for a field celebration of 100 years of the Church's social doctrine, in an area where industrialization had taken place without harming the environment and in a human way. The visit to the Italian region of Basilicata at the end of April, a few days after the publication of the Centesimus Annus, also focused on human labor and on the great importance of work in an area of high unemployment. An answer was needed for the new and old forms of poverty that were encountered on the streets of Rome. The Pope's call for that answer, which he issued from the Roman parish of Santa Dorotea, sums up one of the main pastoral concerns of this 13th year of Pope Wojtyła's term as the city's bishop. The exclusion of immigrants from society was the social problem that worried him most. One morning in September, he received 100 Romani gypsies, some wearing traditional costumes and carrying guitars, in a room of the consistory. "You represent," the Pope told them, "a minority that has no territorial limits and which has always rejected armed struggle as a means of achieving your aims." His Christmas pastoral visit was made to patients at the Sandro Pertini Hospital, where one of the patients reminded him of the 77 days he had spent in Gemelli Hospital following the attempt on his life. John Paul II replied, "The Pope too has had the blessing of being seriously ill." He did not know that he was to return to Gemelli Hospital a further 4 times in the space of 5 years. Ancient Rome had an irresistible fascination for the Polish Pope, who crossed it as if conducting a pilgrimage in the footsteps of the multitude of saints when he visited parishes, mainly in the historical center. The Pope is both a pilgrim in Rome and a flying pilgrim on a world mission. By now, his relationship with the aircraft cabin staff was one of informality and gratitude, and he had an opportunity to show this in an official way during the visit he made to Fiumicino Airport, the home of Alitalia, on the day of the Feast of the Madonna of Loreto, protector of aviation and of flyers. In 13 years of intense work, John Paul II had already covered more than 832,000 kilometers in 53 overseas journeys to 100 different countries, as well as more than 100 visits to Italy. Again in 1991, the Pope of the Redemptoris Missio had again confirmed his choice of the entire world as the horizons of his ministry, and the fact that he truly felt himself to be a successor of Peter and Paul, the two itinerant apostles.
喺之前呢，我哋提到91年嘅百年通諭。喺百年通諭裏邊呢，教宗若望保禄二世呢 當然表達佢對社會主義嘅深惡痛絕。但係另一方面呢，我哋都好知道佢對資本主義呢冇乜好感嘅。佢對資本主義帶嚟嘅貧窮啊、剝削啊、或者係歧視啊，亦都同樣係深惡痛絕。其實呢一樣嘢對佢嚟講並唔係新鮮嘅。事實上喺50年代、60年代嘅時候呢，當佢係反對緊共產黨統治嘅時候呢，同時亦都表示呢，就係話對資本主義社會嗰一套呢，我哋應該提高警惕。所以喺呢套片裏邊呢，佢特別提到就係話我哋要幫助弱小，幫助嗰啲被剝削或者係窮困嘅人。喺戲裏邊有一段呢，就係佢招待嗰啲吉普賽人。吉普賽人喺歐洲呢，被視作為最弱小、最無助嘅一個族群。佢哋係最窮困嘅，喺世界各國呢都係受到歧視嘅。為咗幫助窮人，為咗幫助少數族裔呢，天主教會呢希望，亦都係承諾呢喺呢一方面呢會多做工作。除咗呢一點之外，即係話對資本主義社會，我哋應該表示關心之外呢，教宗喺呢一套片裏邊呢，亦都表達咗就係佢係好急切要去喺呢一個社會急劇轉變嘅過程裏邊呢，睇下究竟教會應該點樣回應種種嘅問題。呢啲問題呢，當然涉及到一啲教會過往嘅價值觀啦。譬如話墮胎、節育、同性戀，我哋應該點樣對待呢？喺呢個問題上邊呢，當然呢就係話天主教會並冇任何嘅突破，但係起碼可以睇到呢，就係話面對社會急劇嘅轉變呢，佢哋都希望呢係重新審視、重新去睇返教會能夠喺呢啲社會問題上面扮演啲咩角色。最後一樣嘢，呢套片亦都好強調就係教宗喺過去13年不斷外訪，亦都呢就係話喺羅馬市裏邊呢係有好多牧民嘅探訪。呢一個呢就係承繼咗聖伯多祿同埋聖保祿中途嘅足跡。而事實上呢，就係話1991年之後，直到現在呢，教宗雖然係越嚟越老啦，但係佢都呢希望呢就係話盡量喺呢一方面呢就做多啲工作，盡量呢就係擴大天主教會喺世界上面嘅影響。